as we go along. But other than that, we are ready to go.
Could I check my voice? Could you be able to hear me clearly, Jenna?
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent.
And let me say hello to Dr. Jafari.
Good evening to you.
Hi, can you remember me?
Yes, a while ago, yes. long time ago.
Long time no see.
Yes.
I was there at UW Stout.
I remember,
Very glad to
yes.
meet you again.
Yes. It was the last century, I'm sure about that.
Yeah. Let me see. I was there about 1998, Dr. Jafari.
Yes, so I was about right, yeah. How time flies.
Yes, time flies.
Okay, so maybe start.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Let me just a second.
Dr. Fiona is with us, so that's excellent. We're definitely ready to go.
Thank you so much, Gianna. So let me ask Professor Jafari to start with welcome remarks from SCoT. Professor Jafari, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Qasim. And I say good morning in Australia time because we are in different parts of the world. For me, it's late evening here. I would like to welcome everybody to SCoT seminar webinar series. This is a Smart Tourism Community webinar series. We decided to start this series in the early part of 2020, and we decided to do something that nobody else is doing. What we observed at the time was that everybody was dealing with big businesses in tourism, airlines, cruise lines, big destinations, big countries depending on tourism, etc., etc., and forgotten where the informal sector of tourism, which is actually the bulk of business. Small operators and small communities totally forgotten. They had no idea what to do. They didn't know to whom to go. They didn't know what is the right question to ask. They didn't know from whom to ask the question. So we did not worry about the big companies because they were always well connected with banks, with the government, with institutions, with the convention centers, with everybody was connected. So there were plenty of webinars for them. So this is what we decided to do to respond to the needs of small communities in tourism, small operators in tourism. We actually started with the word small, but we changed it to smart later on. What is important in our webinar series is the community. The sort of tourism that benefits the community, not just the tourism industry and so on and so forth. So in all the 18 webinars we have done so far, community has been in the center and it will continue to be in the center. As to the theme of this particular webinar, it was purely coincidental. I was exchanging email with Gianna, and it was about people going to a short distance for a vacation during the coronavirus, staycation, etc., etc. And I said, well, let's do a webinar on this subject. And she was gracious to come forward and put this very attractive theme together. I have to say that I have been conscious of the staycation for many years. Actually, I wrote an article in 1980s when we had the energy crisis and people began going to short distance places. They could not fly. They could fly, but it was too expensive. In the case of USA, the price of gas went from 20 cents to $1.29. practically overnight. So people cut the distance and went to nearby places. So I said, well, what should I call that? Because according to the definition of tourism, people are not going 100 miles, they're not spending for the overnight, etc., etc. So I came up with a term that I call it paratourism. And I describe that paratourism very much similar to the way that we are discussing staycation. So it's a hot topic. It was a hot topic then. It's becoming more popular now during the coronavirus, and probably it's going to stay here. People have had now a chance to discover home area. Probably they like it, and probably this is going to be a sector that continues to flourish. And we are here to discuss the subject. We are going to learn from each other, and we are going to make some recommendations. Hopefully, at the end of the webinar, we have some takeaway lessons. What are the things that people can take away and apply it to staycation or small communities, and so on and so forth. So again, once more, thank you on behalf of the developers of the SCoT webinar series, and Kazem is one of the founding members himself, but he's not in charge of technical matters. Thank you very much, Kazem, and the rest of the group, which is orchestrating the webinar series, and welcome to the webinar series.
Thanks, Jafar. And now we have the main person, Gianna. So the floor is yours with your panelists, and we are all eager to listen to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share a screen, which hopefully is a very brief PowerPoint. Yes, looks like everyone can see that, I hope.
Yes.
Yep, we don't want to record that extra. Okay, so thank you, Professor Jafari, and the SCoT, I'm going to call you all SCoT for the duration, team for this opportunity. It came about in part because the group, the international group Best End, which is about building excellence and sustainable tourism, has identified staycations over several years as an important thing, an important trend or strategy or tool for improving global sustainability. And of course, with the onset of COVID-19 travel restrictions, it became a very serious reality for many destinations. So it was an opportunity, and I share the same concerns about small communities. And so I put together a panel that reflects people working in communities and smaller communities and community-based tourism in a number of different places across Asia Pacific, but also a couple of people who both work in those communities, but then also work in the connections between those communities and the bigger world, because I think an ongoing challenge for many small communities around tourism is that lack of necessarily the bridges to the larger distribution system. So hopefully we have some views from a range of different sorts of small communities, but also how those communities link into the larger picture. And I chose people as well who were very focused on practice. As we all know, academics exist in the tourism research world from people who are very focused on conceptual theoretical ideas through to those that are very much focused on practice and how to actually work with people practicing tourism in real world settings. And I feel like this group is more interested in the end of the practice. So all of the panelists are people with that level of experience and interest. Dr. Murphy refers to us often as pracademics, and I think that's a really good description of the group. So I'm going to just talk very, very briefly and then give it over to the panel, because I'm not really the main person here, I'm the facilitator. So pre-COVID, there was already sort of growing recognition that the whole of the global tourism system was under pressure, and a considerable amount of that pressure came from concerns over different aspects of sustainability, be that climate change and carbon emissions versus destination communities who were reacting against tourism because of various perceived or actual issues. So the sort of discussions up to the end of 2019 and into the start of 2020 were about the need to have a greater focus on the well-being of destination communities, more clearly setting out how tourism actually makes a contribution to that, with a shift from worrying so much about well-being of tourists to well-being of destinations. And then a few people starting to talk about degrowth, or the need to encourage people to travel less. And there's travel less as in less holidays, but also travel less distance. So we have less reliance on the longer haul types of travel. And that's essentially where staycations fitted. They are this idea that if you can take a holiday close to home, then you're going to contribute less to various large-scale global problems, but also hopefully contribute more to the well-being of those destinations. So there have been a few people writing about staycations, but not that many actually. And so there's a rare academic definition, which is basically that a staycation is a shortened trip closer to the residence of the participants. And that really connects to two core things, this idea that you're closer to home. So you stay closer to home, but it's also about being a tourist. So there is a sort of an expectation that it's not normal local leisure or normal local recreation, that you are in fact participating in the commercial tourism activities that are available closer to home. And that is the key that perhaps hasn't been given as much attention as it could be. So they don't travel as far, thus limiting their ecological footprint, but they do participate in the available commercial tourism ventures, thus maximising the benefits for local businesses. And I think the other thing that we may need to revise in a definition like the one that Draper's got is the length of stay. I think more sustainable staycations, and especially ones that are better for destinations, are probably going to be longer trips. So I think we may have to start combining staycations with more of the ideas from slow tourism. So that includes virtual tourism, traveling to places without actually leaving your lounge room. And that's made a boom in COVID-19. Challenge there is figuring out how to make money out of it for the destination businesses. It's local activities in your area, but you're staying at home. So your home is the hotel. And in there we see significant overlaps with existing leisure. And then there's local tourism activities where you stay in commercial accommodation kind of close to your home and engage in those commercial tourist activities. So there's a variety of things that we're including when we talk about this. But staycations can be especially challenging for our small communities engaged in tourism. And I'm going to argue we've got three broad types of small communities connected to tourism, and each has its own particular challenges. So the most challenging, I think, are small communities involved in tourism in countries that don't have strong traditions or opportunities for domestic tourism. So where the local people don't or can't travel. So how do we actually encourage staycations in a place where the local population is not typically involved in domestic tourism? And that is somewhat the case for our first speaker, Dr. Fiona from Papua New Guinea. Then we have small communities working in tourism in countries that have quite well-established domestic tourism, and they're in a region fairly close to population centres. So how do we, for them, encourage staycations to continue beyond the COVID restrictions? So how do we make that much more the norm for them? And I think Dr. Pim from Thailand has the most experience with that kind of small community tourism. And then we have small community tourism in countries with established domestic tourism, but they are in quite remote regions, so far away from population centres. And so that's a group that hasn't been tackled very much. And I think all of the panelists have some experience with that. So the sorts of things we're hoping to address in the webinar today is, how do we address those specific challenges? We want to try and find suggestions and case studies. And at the moment, I think we focus a lot on marketing and policy instruments, and that's not a bad thing. But I would think that at least most of my panelists would agree with me that perhaps we need to focus more on creating positive and rewarding experiences so our staycationers want to come back. And then I think there's been very little academic attention paid to this, so some sort of identification of research needs to help support these kinds of principles would be really good. Okay, so we have our panel with us, and I'm going to talk about each one of them. I'm going to introduce each one now, so then we can just move from presentation to presentation. And I'm going to do that by also looking at the program. So our first speaker is Dr. Fiona Andrawa, and she has a lot of expertise with community-based tourism in rural villages in Papua New Guinea. And so she lives and works in a country with that more limited domestic tourism, and so many small communities have relied almost exclusively on international tourism as their markets, and so that's a real challenge then to work around staycations there. Then we'll have Dr. Pim Rawi Rotcherungsat, who's from Thailand, and she's also a community-based tourism expert. But Thailand is a different country. It does have domestic tourism, and it does have a higher population density, because also Papua New Guinea also has the problem that many of these smaller communities are in quite remote locations. Then we're going to hear from Dr. Karen Hughes, and she focuses much more on wildlife and nature-based experiences, but she has expertise in a number of projects that she's run in Australia, China, North America, and that's really focused on a mixture of domestic and international tourism. But she, like Dr. Murphy and myself, has been very focused on experiences, trying to improve experiences. We're going to have a short video in the break, and I want to talk about that just for a second, and then come back, and I'm going to ask some hopefully useful questions to all of my panelists to make the most of their expertise, and then we're going to open it up, I believe, to questions from the audience. So before I talk about that little video and hand over to Dr. Fiona, I just want to thank everyone for attending. Thank Professor Yafari for offering us this opportunity. And I have to say that I did use his name to actually try and leverage some of my speakers into joining us. And so that was very helpful. And thank everyone in the audience for their attention now and for their interactions afterwards. And to finish with then, the short video that I'm going to show is actually a tourism promotional video for a small community destination in Australia. It's a small island community, Magnetic Island. Local population is about 1,700 people. And it's reasonably close to, in Australia, what we would call a medium-sized regional city, but in the rest of the world is next to a small town because Australia has very low population and low population density compared to almost everywhere else. So it is a small community, and they're very much focused on tourism. Tourism is the only economic activity undertaken on that particular island. And at the time when I sent through the images to develop the poster for the website here, Professor Yafari said, you know, where's the community? He virtually, in a very polite way, was asking, where's the community in these pictures? And in fact, the community is not in any of the pictures, hardly at all, because they have very much focused their tourism on them as small tourism business operators, and virtually all of the businesses, tourism businesses there, except for the ferry company that takes people across to one of the 2 ferry companies that takes people across to the island, they're all locally owned. They're all owned and run by people who live in this community. And that Dr. Murphy and I have been working with them for probably a decade now, and they're very keen on keeping large companies away. And this is a classic sort of destination that could have developed with an external large-scale resort company, a major sort of coastal resort, but instead they see themselves as the sort of gatekeepers for some important natural environments, and they very much built the tourism that they offer around those natural environments. So that's what they want their small community tourism to be about. But what happens in practice is that when people come and join them, the experience is very much about these operators talking to and encouraging their tourists to understand and appreciate the lifestyle they have. So while they promote the island on its access to natural environments, the reality of tourist experiences and the sorts of things that tourists say in their online blogs and reviews is very much about how much they've learned about living a more sustainable and relaxed lifestyle in harmony, maybe not always total harmony, with the local environment. So that's why I've chosen to put it in there, because it is a small community focused on tourism, but who's not put their community as the core of that tourism. And the other reason we put them in there is, as I said, we've been working with them for about a decade, and they've always been very focused on sustainability. And one of the early things that they recognised was that a core aspect of sustainability for them was to encourage local tourists from the region very close by to them. And we haven't really thought about it this way yet, but in preparing this webinar, I have started to realise that they are an excellent case study of how building for sustainability was focused on staycations, and those staycations have helped them be remarkably resilient through the COVID-19 restrictions on travel. So with a few exceptions, they have mostly done very, very well and have gone against the trend of many other destinations in our part of the world that were much, much more dependent on longer term travellers. So their choice to focus more on a style of tourism for locals has actually worked out really well for them. So they're an excellent case study. Okay, I'm going to be quiet now and hand over to Dr. Fiona to talk about the challenges that small communities face with regard to tourism and staycations in Papua New Guinea. I think there's my email. I think this is a topic which needs more research, and certainly a few of my colleagues have expressed an interest in that. So if there's anyone in the audience that is interested in joining us, please don't hesitate to contact me. And just before I finally finish and hand over and be quiet for a long time, I have had Routledge, a commissioning editor from Routledge, interested in an edited book on trying to make staycations work, particularly in the Asia Pacific region. So if people have case studies or ideas or research that they think might be relevant to that, please also contact me, as we'll be putting together that book proposal very soon. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Dr. Fiona Endrawa from Papua New Guinea.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Fiona, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, excellent, thank you. Okay, I'll start. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet, all right. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
You can change it to full screen if you like.
Oh. Okay, so I'll start.
Okay.
My presentation is on tourism and remote rural communities in Papua New Guinea and the potential of staycations in PNG. So as Professor Moscato has already defined staycations, this is a definition taken directly from Oxford Dictionary, where a holiday spent in one's home country rather than abroad, or one spent at home involving day trips to local attractions. So staycation has actually been around in the 1940s. So in reality, it's nothing new. However, like other countries experiencing tourism because of COVID-19, staycation is now reversing again. And the different forms of staycations that could be applicable to PNG is proximity tourism and slow tourism, which is traveling slowly and locally. Now, tourism in PNG amidst COVID-19. Tourism in PNG is highly dependent on international tourists coming in. So in 2020, the number of tourism activities or tourists coming in decreased by 82% compared to 2019. We do have domestic tourism that's happening, but it's in a different form because in PNG, we still have these family ties and a system called the one-tech system where we do travel, but we do not utilize hotels or lodges. We tend to stay with relatives, family and friends. So traveling locally for the purpose of VFR, visiting friends and relatives, and it's also very difficult to capture that because there are no systems or structures in place to capture such tourism. And generally, domestic tourism in PNG is rather slow. So right now in PNG, what's happening because of COVID-19 and there's a lack of international tourists coming in is to encourage local tourism. And the national airline has now taken on board the strategy to reduce flights in terms of the rates, the cost of airline tickets, so that could encourage local Papua New Guineans to travel within PNG itself. However, that is also a challenge because of COVID-19 that's happening right now. Traveling within PNG from one province to another is rather difficult. And the main mode of transport in PNG is by air, using air transport. And with the current control measures in place to travel from one province to another, you'll have to get permission and you'll have to test negative for COVID-19. So that's also a challenge alone when it comes to encouraging local Papua New Guineans to travel within the country. The potential of staycations in remote areas, and I'm talking now from the perspective of post-COVID-19. Within PNG, there are different forms of tourism, and these are cultural experiences, village life experience or homestay, exotic wildlife, experiencing the wildlife of PNG, coastal tourism, nature-based tourism, agritourism, and health and well-being tourism is rather interesting now because of COVID-19 and given PNG's economic status, the health facilities cannot really cater now for the everyday diseases or sicknesses. The focus is now on COVID-19, and as such, it has forced everyday Papua New Guineans to now rely on herbs and going back and using our traditional forms of medicine So health and well-being tourism is now being seen as a potential form of tourism in PNG, where, like I said, everyday Papua New Guineans are going back and looking for things like lemongrass, pawpaw leaves, ginger, turmeric, where we now use to either drink as tea or steam ourselves as a prevention towards COVID-19. And so within these broad forms of tourism in PNG, within these broad forms, there is also potential for niche tourism and special interest tourism. For instance, like coastal tourism, there is the possibility of game fishing, scuba diving, and another example would be deep sea diving. And these forms of tourism can happen or has the potential to happen within remote areas of PNG. And that is when I say remote areas, I'm referring to villages, local villages especially. However, there are also challenges with this potential. And as a country, these are the challenges that are being faced by the local residents within the remote areas. There is poor accessibility in terms of road infrastructure, because some areas are so remote, and given the rugged terrain of Papua New Guinea, some roads are actually non-existent. So to get there is a great challenge. Another challenge is limited infrastructure in the form of electricity, having regular water supply. Communication is also a major challenge within these rural areas. So we've got rural tourism operators that have tapped into tourism, but another challenge for them is also having that limited skills and knowledge, where some of them are not even trained in tourism or have not even attended a workshop in tourism. So there is another challenge again is limited tourism skills and knowledge. And then there's also the challenge of lack of communication between the policymakers and tourism operators within these remote areas. There is a disconnection. Whatever is being decided at the local level, sometimes that information is not trickled down right to the grassroots level. So in PNG, we have the national level, and then we have the provincial level, and then we have the local level. So the local level, between the national level and the local level, there is a disconnection. Somehow information is not passed right down to that level. And of course, like other countries, there is also the problem of law and order, which is a hindrance to tourism in PNG. So how does PNG as a nation tap into tourism amidst COVID-19 and beyond? The potential for tourism in PNG. So staycation as a means to revitalize tourism. PNG can take that approach, given the fact that we rely heavily on international tourists. So staycation could be a means to revitalize or revive our tourism. And also to encourage local Papua New Guineans to appreciate the diverse culture that is taken for granted. Just the background information, PNG is diverse in culture. We have 800 plus different languages, and we come from a land of 1,000 tribes. So one Papua New Guinean belonging to another province's culture is different from another Papua New Guinean belonging to another province. And the concept of one idea of tourism is to travel abroad so that you can understand and appreciate another country's culture. Whereas in PNG, we can take that approach and use tourism to understand our own diverse culture. And staycation can also encourage local economy. Staycation being encouraging local economy, because most of our tourist operators are from the informal sector, and the vendors are also from the informal sector. The vendors are the ones that sell the arts and crafts. The vendors are the ones that sometimes help out with the local lodges or trackers. And for Papua New Guineans to also take on staycation is a means to be more sensitive towards sustainability. For us as a country, we take all these things for granted because for us, nature is an everyday thing. Our culture, we see it as an everyday thing where other people, they're losing it, but for us, we still hold on to it. So for staycation to be the means and the platform to use for us to be encouraged to participate more in domestic tourism. And the bottom line would be to change the mindset of us local Papua New Guineans, because we have adopted this mindset where for tourism to take place, you have to travel overseas. And this is also in relation to maybe Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where when you travel overseas, you are seen to have that purchasing power. And with that, having that higher purchasing power comes with your self-esteem. You have a higher self-esteem. But to change that mindset for us Papua New Guineans, that instead of going overseas and spending, why not spend within your own domain, your own local domain? And while you were doing that, you were also encouraging your local economy by supporting the local businesses and again, SMEs, both in formal and informal sectors, and having that potential to appreciate another culture within your own country. So staycations, having the concept of staycation is in PNG is rather new. And I say rather new because I was just looking at documents and trying to research for the purpose of this conference if there was anything on staycation in PNG. Even the policymakers, there is no such term as staycation. There is domestic tourism, yes, but domestic tourism here is in the sense of traveling to another province and staying maybe just within the town area and not traveling too much further inland, not traveling too remote. So that's domestic tourism, but staycation within domestic tourism can be encouraged. And again, I'd like to emphasize that that can only be encouraged if we change our mindset and not see tourism as traveling overseas, but within our own country and within our own local domain, where we do not have to travel to another province, but travel within the province that we are currently living in or we are in, traveling within that province and taking part in tourism by visiting the villages and visiting remote areas where they offer tourism activities and tourism sites. And this brings me to the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I'm just trying to get my, I'm back. I think what we're doing is we're going to hold questions till the end. So I'm going to go straight to Dr. Pim from Thailand for her presentation. She works in a different context, so we'll have a look at some of the things that are different and perhaps some of the same things that keep recurring in these presentations. So Pim, whenever you're ready.
Okay, sure. I'm trying to sharing my screen, but I still cannot. Maybe I think Fiona should stop sharing her screen first. Okay. All right.
Okay, done.
Done. Okay. Let me see. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Not yet.
Can you see the screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Share the screen here. Let me see. Share. Okay.
Working now. Yes, perfect. Oh no, you went to another page. Click on the.
Share.
You can click on the PowerPoint logo in the bottom. Yes.
Can you see it,
Yes.
Jenna?
Yes.
Already? Okay. Right. Great. Thank you very much, Jenna, and everyone for being here. And I'm very glad to be in this session. And thank you for attending, all my colleagues, like in Germany, in Japan, and Thai colleagues. From this topic, I think it's very interesting. And from my perspective in Thailand, I use the topic like staycation, whether it will be opportunity for small countries, small communities in Thailand or not. Because at the moment in Thailand, it has not been implemented widely as this concept of staycation. So as we know that when COVID-19 occurred, everywhere in the world has to reset. And I think the word reset is very strong for this situation, because we have to change our perspective and change the way of seeing the world, especially implementation for small community as well. Right now, we are in the age of VUCA. VUCA is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But however, the world still trying to reach the goal of sustainable development goal, which is the policy from United Nations. Thailand also one of the country that faced the VUCA age. You can see the number, as well as Papua New Guinea, that the international tourists dropped down from 2019 to 2020 after the COVID-19, 71%. So most of the time you'll see the picture like this. Domestic tourists travel in a small group in unseen places, not a lot of tourists. And behavioral change in Thailand because of the reduction of international tourists. So we rely more on domestic tourist income, and people are willing to travel domestically near their home because they feel safe. And if they can have a choice, they will travel to the unseen places, not very crowded or in high season. So I think this can link to the popularity of the term staycation, or the synonym of holiday stay as well. When I assigned to speak about staycation of community in Thailand, I searched the keyword Thailand staycation community tourism in Google, and I found out that the term staycation has not been widely implemented yet for small community in Thailand. But on the other hand, it's widely implemented in accommodation or lodging business, like this one, or this one. It's used as a marketing term to promote hotels, staycation, and hotel try to pick the nice picture to make tourists feel at home, to feel private, something like this. Like staycation, leave the panic at home and check in at the hotel. And some small business also use staycation as names, like this one. Two coffee shop in Bangkok use the name staycation to attract people to travel to the place. So in terms of staycation, I think the definition covers about, it's another form of alternative tourism, I believe, and it's fully in line with slow tourism, as Gianna said before. And in the concept of slowcation is slow tourism, sorry, is invite you to live in the present moment and encourage you to take your time discovering nearby landscape and also reconnect more time outdoor and nature to the people around you. And in the concept, I think there are very three clear or prominent aspects in the staycation. The destination have to be near tourist location, and they should offer relaxing atmosphere, not very crowded. And another thing is should offer lesser cost. That's the benefits of the term staycation, and I think is a good solution for this pandemic situation at the moment. So staycation, I think, is another change of perspective looking to traveling industry, because it's in line with slow tourism as sustainable touristic movement. It's trying to push people or pull people to travel by rediscovering the beauty of the region around you, and this benefit, potential benefit of the term staycation, I believe. For small community in Thailand, staycation may be opportunity for environmental, social, economic benefits to their business. Because right now in Thailand, we are practicing the concept of ESG. E is environmental conservation, social people's life sustainability, and when managing, we try to focus on governance way. So right now in Thailand, we are talking about the building resilient community. And the opportunity is very wide open for community tourism and domestic traveling, because the government launched the campaign Rao Tiuด้วยกัน, means let's travel, and reduce the travel expense about 40%. This is another strategy that supports the local travel and also staycation term, because there are 5R strategy from the Tourism Authority of Thailand: reboot, rebuild, rebrand, rebound, and rebalance. And the strategy that can link directly to tourist community, small community, is the reboot one, because they're trying to attract people to go travel and go local. And when you travel, you have to concern about the rebalance, meaning go responsible and concern about sustainability. And the very important things, when tourists travel, tourists need something that make them confident that the place is safe. In Thailand, we have the SHAR sign called Safety Health Administration. So the business and also community can apply or register to meet the standard of this sign and show that the place is safe to tourists. So the question whether staycation concept can be an opportunity for small community, I think it is, yes, because especially community in Thailand, there are very strong connection among communities, and each community can offer very unique ways of all 5 A's, their own attractions, their prominent, their style of accessibility, activities to offer, amenity, and the very unique way of presenting their accommodation. And also plus 5S. S, when you enter community in Thailand, most of the time you'll see smile. People love to smile and welcome tourists still, although in the pandemic situation. And when you reach the community, each community can give you some secret thing that you have to be there. Like this one, like secret recipe from the grandmother in the community. And the surprise presentation from the community, this one is like a set of meal presenting to tourists in dinner time. And spiritual place for them to visit. Importantly is the story of each community or the history to tell to tourists who are visiting. Like this one, I sat in the boat along the river of Tajin in one community. And the leader of the community tells the story. In the time of King Rama V, also travel along this river, and it was very interesting. So the concept of staycation can get in line and support the quality tourism and tourists, but just the way that you know how to implement it. And, you know, the staycation can be benefit concept that community can implement because each community can provide luxury experience to tourists who visit. Like this one, in terms of luxury, it's not in COVID-19, it's not like luxury life that you stay in a 5-star hotel or buying a brand name product. But luxury in the new normal way means like maybe you can just stay at home or near your place and get some luxury experience. And it's also concerned with sustainability. So this is a case that I brought to you. This community called Ban Lam community in Suphanburi province in Thailand. If you are interested, you can read the story of it too. And it's just 2 hours drive from Bangkok. So that's the concept of staycation. A nice view along the river, especially they offer the homestay to tourists. This one is about 105 years old homestay. And the strong point of the community, this community can gather different generations to work together. This is the luxury experience that I told you, that they come and welcome tourists with their show, with their style, and you know, they introduce themselves by singing a song to tourists. And I asked them why they're so strong community. They can cooperate very well. And the trick is that this lady's mother, you know, she has 14 kids and settle around the community. So they are kind of like brothers and sisters. So that's a trick why they are a very strong community. And we learned about the art of weaving from this lady and the arts of cooking. And here's the surprise thing from the community that I said. They serve in the low carbon way. They use banana leaves and the straw from the nature, not plastic straw. And the set of meals, the very exciting thing is you will not know what you will eat because all the set of meal will be cooked from different houses. So it depends what you will get from the meal. This is nice experience. And you have to carry your own meal to the table in traditional style. And this is the house that I said is 150 years old, homestay along the river Tajin. And when you stay in this homestay, it feels like you are in the past 100 years backward. And it was quite interesting experience, but you need someone to stay with you, actually. Here's some activities that this community offer to tourists, making the herbal and flower like incense, and you know, making Thai dessert in a community way, traditional way. It's kind of like plus the creative tourism concept. So when I have been to this community and talk about the concept of staycation to them, to the leader, and you know, immediately he understand and he think that this concept helped him. So immediately he create the clip video presenting his community and use Staycation by Ban Lam Suphan CBT. And this clip video is sent for the contest of Tourism Authority of Thailand, and I hope that they will win. It hasn't been announced yet. Here is the case study that the nearby community in Bangkok. So I think staycation can get along with small community tourism, because small community tourism can offer tourist-based activity that are not too far from tourist home. And there are more communities in Thailand that are connected and linked. We have the big data of small community in Thailand, like this one is created by CBT Thailand. So at the end of my presentation, I think communities in Thailand is quite ready for the term or the implementation of staycation. If we are not hit by COVID-19 very severe at this time, opportunity may be happened for staycation in small community of Thailand. So thank you very much. Jenna, back to you.
Thank you, Pim. That's excellent. I was starting to try and write down some of those linkages and then realized, of course, I can look up the recording. I don't need to write them down. Starting to get like some of my undergraduate students. So that's an excellent presentation. And it was interesting. There was the link to luxury, I think, is one that we probably haven't talked about in any of the other seminars. So that's kind of intriguing. But I'm going to move straight on to our third speaker, Dr. Karen. And so it looks like Pim has stopped sharing her screen, so we can just go straight to Karen.
Thanks, Jana. I was asked to talk about some of the benefits and challenges of getting people to consider staycations as a viable option instead of going long haul. I don't have a PowerPoint, I'm just going to talk, but I want to start, and I am going to reiterate some of the things that Fiona and Pim have already talked about. I'll start with a common saying, I'm sure you're all familiar. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. And for many Australians at least, that fence seems to be somewhere around Dubai. So we have this common urban myth in Australia. It goes something like this. You need to travel overseas first. You can do Australia once you're old and decrepit and can't travel far anymore. And I don't think this is unique to Australians either. I think a lot of us feel that we have to go halfway around the world to get a quality experience. And this can also happen in the holiday destination itself. And let me tell you a little story to illustrate my point. So every year, my family goes to the Blue Mountains for a week's holiday. We usually stay in a place called Wentworth Falls, and we do long walks every day. Now, there's a walk that starts in Wentworth Falls, but oh no, every year we'd all pile into the car and we're going to do all the other walks in the Blue Mountains, but not the one that started at our back doorstep. We figured we could do that anytime, but we never did. Until the one year where we stayed at the other end of the Blue Mountains, and suddenly Wentworth Falls was far away. It was exotic, it was different. So guess what? We all piled into the car, drove to Wentworth Falls and did that walk, the one that's usually right under our noses, and it turned out to be the best in the entire national park. What idiots were we? So my question is, how do we get people to notice and value what's in their own backyard? How do we get them to rate staycations up there with long haul travel? Now, it shouldn't be too difficult. Staycations have lots of benefits, and Fiona and Pim have actually already talked about some of these. First of all, for the traveller, they're less stressful. There's no need to worry about passports, tipping rules, transport options, and being ripped off by tourist scams, for example. They're efficient. Even just a couple of days can leave you feeling refreshed and recovered. They're flexible. You don't usually have to book months in advance. In many cases, last minute really can be last minute. They're familiar. There's no need to worry about the food, etc. They're safe. Usually, as a traveller or a staycationer, you're connected to local events and networks through your mobile phone. You can adjust your activities and movements to avoid crowding, traffic congestion, extreme weather events, for example. But best of all, probably, they're user-friendly. The locals speak your language, they get you. And if you don't like it, you can easily turn around and come home. No penalties, no questions asked. But also, let's not forget what's at the heart of why we want people to take staycations. Benefits to the environment and benefits to local communities. There's a range of these, but just the main ones, no long-haul flights. So essentially, your staycationers are reducing their carbon footprints. There's no need to buy special equipment or clothing. You can save a fortune in the planet at the same time. People get to appreciate their local surroundings, local wildlife. They can even spend holidays doing projects to protect the local environment. And their tourist dollars are helping local businesses stay in business. So there's lots of positives associated with staycations. Why then are they so unappealing? I think one of the main barriers is familiarity. We know that the main reason people travel is to discover the exotic and the unknown. Tourists want to be amazed, intrigued, stimulated, inspired, engaged. Home is kind of familiar, predictable, routine, boring even. So I guess our first challenge is to create experiences that are going to appeal to local markets. Now, in this, we may need to forget the same old stuff that attracts and amazes international tourists. Your locals are probably going to need something slightly different. As an example, I know for a fact that my kids wouldn't hold a koala for $1 million. Oh, no, they're stinky. They have really sharp claws. There's no way I want to do that. So top tourist activity may not be top local activity. So we may need to tweak our usual offerings. If we're used to getting international tourists, we may need to make some adjustments. We can showcase places and experiences that perhaps aren't well known, off the beaten track, might be particularly attractive for our locals. We could create activities that connect people with their own heritage, their own surroundings, their own neighbourhoods. We want to foster belonging, ownership, a sense of community. We need to design experiences that are fun, friendly, easy, flexible. Perhaps we consider putting together modules in a range of different configurations so that people can make their own experiences and their own holidays. Essentially, we need to provide something outside what locals already do on weekends, but inside the regional area. I think the second major challenge with promoting staycations and getting people to consider them seriously is the brag factor. People always ask where you went on holiday, and it can sound really lame if you say, well, nowhere much. We just hung around and stayed at home and did some day trips. But I want to argue that it's all in the framing, and we need to encourage people to see things differently. We want them to say, I had a really great staycation. I did a bunch of activities I've never done before. I made some new friends who live close by, and I discovered great places that I can revisit again and again and again. So it's about offering something different, unusual, unexpected in the local area that connects people with their community and their surroundings. The third thing has already been touched on. It's actually quite difficult to convince people to pay for quality and sometimes quite expensive local experiences. You can probably hear it right now if I say it. I'm not paying for that. I can make that, I can buy that, I can do that for myself at half the price. What a ripoff. The fact that people would willingly pay 6 times as much if they were somewhere like Venice or New York is neither here nor there. The fact it's in their local environment makes them think, no, I'm not paying for that. So this is a really difficult challenge here. So my point really is that we need to be careful assuming that staycations are the perfect panacea to the current lack of international tourists. Jana touched on this in her introduction. Staycations only bring economic benefits if we can convince locals to open their wallets. Sadly, all too often, staycations involve driven day trips with self-catered picnics, self-guided walks, selfie photographs, very little evidence of the self spending money in the local community. So we're going to need quality products and quality experiences to overcome this challenge. Before we tackle the elephant in the room, the COVID-19, I just want to quickly recap. So if we're ever going to get people to swipe right on staycations, we're really going to have to hone in on this sense of experiencing something special in their own backyard. We need quality experiences that locals would be happy to pay for. And we need to give them really good reasons to readjust their sites to something that's closer to home. And a global pandemic is perfect. So instead of bemoaning the lack of international travel, and certainly in Australia at least, a revolving door of state border closures, openings, closures, restrictions, a whole range of uncertainties around COVID, let's just look on the bright side. Staycations are currently flavour of the month, or the year, or maybe even 2 to 3 years. So it's time to take advantage. So if we can get people to reflect upon the benefits of staycations, they might think twice about the way they live, work and play well into the future. So we know from our work in environmental interpretation that visitors' uptake of environmental behaviour is often glacial. It can take months or even years before behaviours become a habit. People often start with the low-hanging fruit, the easy stuff. They might recycle or avoid plastic packaging. They might reuse and repurpose things more. Eventually, they might progress to the harder decisions, such as driving less, using public transport, and changing their holiday habits, including taking fewer long-haul flights. But with COVID, travel has basically been cut off at the knees. It was instant. There was no choice, no progression. Basically, it's staycations or nothing. So I think things can now go one of two ways. The ideal, obviously, is people get used to staycations. They actually start to enjoy them as much, if not more, than traveling long distance. Staycations become the norm and a habit. And travel to far-flung destinations might become more unusual, less common. And I think it's likely that concerns about health and safety risks will play a role here. People are already starting to discuss the health and safety risks of travelling overseas. Many may simply decide the risks outweigh the benefits. They've enjoyed staycations. They're just going to continue doing that. The alternative, and we do have to consider this as well, people are sick to death of being at home. They feel cooped up, deprived. Long-haul travel and overseas destinations become so attractive they can't possibly resist. And once our borders open up and international flights resume, they're going to go nuts. So as proponents of staycations and as environmentalists, we've got our fingers crossed for the first option, but we do need to consider that the second could occur. So we've now got time. And we need to really take advantage. We need to get people loving local products so much they no longer pine for the fields. Perhaps part of this as well is really looking closely at why do people travel overseas? Why do they want to take long-haul flights? Perhaps we can actually replicate some of those things. So perhaps we can even have something like Mexican Month where local businesses come together to bring Mexico to the people. No need to go there. Or try to capitalise on similarities between overseas attractions and our own. So for Australians, this might be drawing comparisons between the Amazon jungle and the Daintree, European Alps and the Australian Alps. Now, admittedly, ours aren't as big, but they're still Alps. And then perhaps even think about things like VR experiences. Can we actually get people to experience the exotic and the different through VR? Is it a possibility as well? So essentially, we're really wanting them to get to think that the grass is just as green on this side of the fence. We just need to get our products and messaging right. So staycations are cheap, they're close, they're easy, the locals are friendly. What more could you want from a holiday? Thanks, Jana.
Thank you. Let me just get me back again. Okay, thank you to the speakers. I think now is, I'll take advice from Kazem on this. Now is usually a short break and we're going to show the video, is that correct? And then we'll come back and I've got some questions to ask all the panelists and then we will open it up to questions from the group. Does that sound acceptable?
Perfect.
All right, so
Yes.
I will share my screen and hopefully this video, of course I've done the wrong thing. I've tried to play the video before I've shared the screen. Hang on, I'll share my screen and hopefully it will.
Yes, working.
It's good to go for people.
If you click in the bottom, there are two boxes and play it. We have a better sound. Maybe you stop the video once and reshare it. We don't have the sound. Gianna.
Okay, so I had a few messages saying that it was playing in chunks, so my apologies for that. It looked like it was playing fine at my end. One of those technical hitches. I chose this one because this is a promotional video made by this community. The families that you saw in there are actually two of the local tour operators. And quite a lot of the drone footage was actually filmed by their children. And some of the people in the first part enjoying themselves as tourists are actually members of the local tourist marketing organisation. So they are very proud of what they've done in terms of promotional video that showcases what they believe is come to us and you'll get a great coastal island experience, not necessarily a small community experience. So they have, I think, taken on board, not deliberately, but somewhat by thinking differently, some of the things that Karen was talking about in terms of not so much, come locally, they're saying come to a place that has a great natural environment and beautiful beaches and the opportunity to engage in the sort of experience that pre-COVID, a lot of Australians paid and flew overseas to get. They went to places like Fiji and Bali to have similar sorts of experiences, but they're very proud of the fact of what they did locally with very little money and using all local people in the video. It doesn't show the community except at the very end when there's a little pan over the one sort of bay that actually has substantial habitation, but that's because they are very much trying to present that as equal to the rest of the world kind of destination, which I think picks up on some of the themes for Karen. So I had just a couple of questions as we head towards the end that I wanted to ask my panel because Laurie and Jenny didn't get a chance to present their experiences. So I'm going to start with Jenny first. So the question that I want to start with, I have three, but I'm going to focus on two in terms of timing. And I'm going to drop the one about virtual tourism because I suspect that might be too hard. And in fact, when I sent those out, at least one of my panel members went, I don't know. So I think we might not ask that question. So the question I wanted to ask is the two questions I want to ask. So I'll start with the first one. If staycations are not viable.
Mommy,
Sorry. Oh, no, sorry. If staycations are not a viable option, and as Karen said, in some places, they're not going to be. I noticed that both Fiona and Pim talked about slow tourism. So I guess I'm going to start with Jenny, to say, is slow tourism an alternative that might last longer, particularly if we are able to travel in the next few years post COVID-19, if we ever get to that world? Are they an alternative for small communities, particularly in your experience through the different parts of Asia?
Thank you, Gianna. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel in this afternoon's webinar. And yes, my answer to your question is yes. I think slow travel is indeed a very good alternative to staycation, especially in places that are far-flung. We've heard Fiona talk about the case of PNG this afternoon, and I think encouraging the local people to see the value of the diversity and culture in the different products and experiences that each village, in the case of PNG, can offer. I think that's a good route to take. Also because slow travel is a form of tourism that actually highlights and preserves the traditional, indigenous, and authentic experiences. So this is one way of encouraging local people and eventually international visitors once borders reopen.
Laurie, slow tourism, just noting that we've been talking about Magnetic Island. the one challenge, I had hoped to have someone from Magnetic Island talking to us, but Saturday afternoon in the midst of local school holidays means they're all busy. But one of their challenges has been they've done exceptionally well through from Thursdays to Mondays. So staycations, people coming and staying over weekends. The challenge for them is slow tourism, is trying to get people to come and stay longer. So Laurie, what are your thoughts on slow tourism for these smaller, often somewhat more remote communities?
I thank you, Jana. Yeah, I do think that slow tourism does have the potential to help these small communities be viable and sustainable by relying on fewer tourists who stay longer. So you're not trying to attract as many tourists. And the slow tourism philosophy about using local transport infrastructure and engaging with the local community means you don't have to invest so heavily in tourist infrastructure or resorts and attractions for tourists. It's much more about them coming and engaging with the community. So I think it does lend an opportunity for communities to look at tourism differently and think about how do we provide the infrastructure that makes it easier for us to live in a place and get around and walk and take public transport and go cycling, etc., and use that to attract the sorts of tourists that want to have those experiences as well. So you're investing in infrastructure that benefits the community, not just tourists. But of course, it requires that infrastructure to be built, and a lot of the communities don't have necessarily easy access by road, as Fiona has spoken about, or the road network is not well maintained. We know locally in Australia that the sale of caravans and motorhomes and camper vans has gone through the roof during COVID. And there's some main highways that you can travel on using those. But again, once you try to get into those more remote areas, that is a challenge. So I think it is about looking and thinking about it from a community point of view, what is the infrastructure that supports us as a community that will allow others to come here and stay and engage in a much more slow way, and food and drink and experiences that we create for ourselves are something that the tourists will want as well.
I guess that somewhat raises the issue, and we haven't really tackled it in our presentations, but it's one that we have to go and think about a bit, is that currently most governments are responding to the challenges the tourism industry faces by offering vouchers and discounts to residents. That seems to be right across the board, cheap flights or vouchers that you can use to cut the cost, or some of them are paying it directly to tourism businesses so that they can give people cheaper. And in essence, we're talking that maybe they might be better suited to shifting some of that funding towards thinking about, is now the opportunity to begin to look at some of those smaller communities and thinking about some of those infrastructure needs that might actually service, because I know in Australia, and I think this may be the case elsewhere, we've tended to go, you don't have enough people to justify an airport or a train line. We've always thought about tourism in terms of the larger scale, resort style, shorter stay kind of things. Maybe we need to be finding ways to talk to our governments about rethinking tourism and therefore rethinking the sorts of infrastructure that they might want to support in those communities. Before I go to the next question, I just wondered if either Fiona, Pim or Karen had anything to say about that. What can we do to try and encourage slow tourism as well as staycations?
I think the key to a lot of this stuff is to one, you need the experiences, and certainly in this region of Southeast Queensland, the businesses that have survived COVID are the ones that have been able to pivot and go, okay, I don't have my usual markets, I need the local markets, but what can I do to attract them? So they're not just, as I've said before, they're not just offering exactly the same as what they used to. They're thinking, all right, what do my locals want? What are they interested in? What's going to engage and attract them? That's what I need to focus on. And I think also making people feel good about their choices. So saying, look, if you come here, it'll ensure that next time you get an international visitor, our business will be still here for you to bring them to. We need your support. Please come and support us, and really making it very obvious why we need the local support. Make people feel good about their choices. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but anyway, that was just...
No, I think it does address it. I think the idea, we've never talked about tourism very much in the past as being something you do for a community. It has tended to be something you do for yourself, and if you can do it in a way that's good for others, that's nice. But if we can also pivot more towards, you have a responsibility to go and engage in tourism that actually is benefiting the communities that you visit, and I think that fits very well with the ethos of many of our small communities. So my last question, before we open it up to any other questions that are out there, was what can, because I suspect, and as the names keep cropping up in front of me, I haven't looked at everybody, but names keep popping up. I recognize a lot of academics in the audience. And so I guess my last question, and I'll start with Laurie this time and then go to Jenny and then to the others, is what sort of research can we as academics do to try and support the various things that we've talked about today?
Well, I think we've mentioned the communities a lot today, and I think that there is really historically been more focus from academics on understanding tourists and not the communities, and we really need to start focusing more on how governance of tourism at destination levels and the policy decisions are made. So if we can do research in that area to really try to understand communities, what their aspirations are and what their needs are in terms of how tourism can contribute to improving their quality of life, because there's really no point having tourism in a community if it doesn't improve the daily life for those people that have it. So I think, yeah, if we look at what are, from a tourism asset point of view and experiences and attractions, what are the ones that the community can benefit from? So again, we're developing those experiences and infrastructure for the community as well as visitors, then the destinations are going to be much more resilient. So yeah, I think we need to start shifting more to not just seeing the community as an asset, the friendly locals, but how do we educate them about tourism? How do we engage with them in the decision making around tourism, and how can we govern for tourism at the national, state and regional levels to ensure that the communities are at the core of those decisions that are made.
I'm muted again, sorry. Thanks. Jenny, your thoughts?
Yes, thanks, Gianna. I understand that you said you're not going to mention about virtual tourism, but I think virtual communities play a big role in actually developing and encouraging and educating tourists to visit small communities, especially those in remote areas. There's a study by Wang Yu and Meyer about 20 years ago, less than that, maybe 18 years ago, and it's about virtual communities. And they said that there are different elements to virtual communities, and I think these are the things that we need to explore. They mentioned about people who interact with each other. There's a shared purpose. There are policies to guide interactions within that community, and also having the right computer systems to support, mediate, and facilitate interactions. And in this virtual communities that can be used to encourage and educate locals and even international visitors, I think it's a good platform for tripartites or different partnerships, maybe between academics, between governments, local, regional, or national governments, and the local businesses. And these are essentially the core group of or core elements that can start this virtual community and then expand at a later time. So in terms of research, virtual communities, I think, is something that we can look into as academics as well.
Thank you. Pim, your thoughts on the research that we need to do?
Well, I think if we talk about the terms of staycation, I think it's still not right now. It's kind of like new terms, and people are still not sure what is staycation. Sometime we are just still in discussing. So I think we can find how tourists and hosts understand the concept of staycation, like the sense of distance or practical implementation. It could be studied, and how this concept of staycation can help sustain community tourism, maybe with the practice of implementation of local tourism marketing or regional development. And if you look in different eyes, like we might want to explore the expectation of tourists in aesthetics and authenticity in terms of staycation in community tourism, or in terms of community, we can study about how new way of management that staycation or aspect of staycation they have to concern in applying this concept to community tourism. I think this topic might be interesting things to initiate to it. Jenna.
Thank you. Fiona?
All right, thank you. With some further research on staycation, we've spoken about research on the communities, so they can be empowered as to how to enhance staycation, which Dr. Murphy just mentioned. Maybe a possibility would be researching on the regulators of tourism as to how best they can implement the concept of staycation so that it is supported locally. So that would be one suggestion that I can make.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd have to say that there has been some research done over time, but it's certainly an area, a group we don't often do much research with. Those are the government, particularly at regional, not so much regional, but maybe the next level up, the one in between national and local. We haven't done a lot about how they think about and make decisions for tourism. And certainly in doing some of the projects that I've worked on, I'm sometimes quite surprised that, for example, local council, local government, elected officials have a very limited understanding of tourism as a system and often operate on the basis of quite a few stereotypes that they seem to pick up from popular media. And so they are often unaware that there are other forms of tourism than the ones that they themselves personally have seen. So I think that that's an area for quite a lot of work. And so I'm going to finish by asking Karen for her thoughts about research, and then we'll open it up to any of the questions from the participants, which I'll let Kazim organise. But Karen, any last thoughts from you?
I think Kim had a really good point that we really need to clearly define what do we mean by staycations. Is it a distance thing? Because for some places, 100 kilometres, you still haven't got to your neighbour's house, whereas other places, 100 kilometres is another country. So some definitions around that and some shared understandings I think are very, very important. Or do we mean just one hop? So it's one train trip, one small plane trip, whatever it is. I think we haven't really got that clear, and that might be hindering where we're going in terms of our research. The other thing, the VR experience stuff that we kind of said was too hard. I do think there's some potential there but it's going to be difficult because most remote small communities don't have the internet connections facilities for people to do the virtual reality crossover to a different community type of experience. So I don't know if that's possible.
Okay, thank you.
Essentially, we need to work out how to make staycation sexy. That would be my bottom line. That's the research we need. That's my bottom line.
And I think the virtual tourism, we won't start that conversation because we're sort of coming towards probably the end of everyone's ability to stay in a Zoom webinar. And we want to have the opportunity to answer any questions from people who are out there listening to us. But I think the real catch is is getting tourists to pay, because what's happened is during COVID, a lot of tourism operators in all sorts of places have managed to provide those virtual experiences as a way of staying connected to their customers or potential customers, but they didn't make anybody pay for it then. So the key is now, how would you get people to actually pay for that?
I did do some
especially-
research and find a good example of a destination that got people to pay, Gianna, so I can share that shortly. So the Tweed Coast, which is North Coast, New South Wales here in Australia, one of the local Mount Warning Tours company, for $175, people could buy a range of products that got delivered to their house from local distilleries and farms and cottage industries, with a USB stick that had a documentary about farm tourism and the region, some recipe cards and a shopping list. And then they got access, special member access to the website, and they actually had some of the local chefs doing live stream cooking classes from that destination. So yeah, I think there's lots of examples where there might have been behind the scenes or demonstrations happening that people weren't paying for them. But this one, you know, it allowed those small businesses that were relying on tourists to come to their farm gate could actually ship the product to the people's homes, and then they would, you know, get in the webinars and together make recipes from those. So, and from my research, I think it was $175 for that package and experience.
Yeah, there are some examples, I think, in specialized online retail sales that could be adapted in that way. That sort of the sorts of things. So I think they probably are out there existing, but on the whole, we haven't seen a lot of discussion around that in the tourism world. Okay, we will probably pass over to Kazem, whether there's many.
I can see. Thank you,
Questions?
Gianna. Yeah, there are a couple of questions I see. I think one question goes to Fiona. Is asking about developing and small countries. He or she is asking that maybe she suppose Staycations is working more for developed countries and big countries. So how about the small and underdeveloped countries? I think you already answered this question in your presentation. Do you want to add some more, Fiona?
All right, thank you. Like I said, it comes back to changing our mindset as local Papua New Guineans to contribute towards domestic tourism. And COVID-19 has, in a way, in a good way in tourism, sorry, that it has given us that ability to think within our own self and to promote tourism within PNG. And of course, tourism in a Western society, domestic tourism is different for a developing country, given the resources, the availability of resources, infrastructure, and the level of understanding of tourism. So to answer that question, and in a nutshell, it comes back to us to reframe our mindset so we can contribute in tourism. And I'd like to say that as a Papua New Guinean, for me to travel to another province, it would be comfortable for me, as opposed to maybe an international tourist traveling to another province. Comfortable in the sense that I can freely get on the plane, I can freely use the public transport, and of course I have to be cautious of safety, but it would be less expensive because I might not have to spend so much on transport. I could rely on family and friends support as well when it comes to transport. I hope I've answered.
Thank you, Fiona. Yes, actually, before I go to the next question, I have a couple of comments in my mind. That one is, as Karen mentioned, this COVID is an opportunity to reopen Staycations market, but I think it won't be sustainable if we just look at COVID as a push factor for Staycations. It's just why people don't go local, or why such destinations are not attractive to local people is maybe because those service providers are not targeting this local market. So we have to teach them how to do this target marketing for post-COVID and more sustainable. And I really enjoyed all presentations. They were very handful, but I want also to see not only a pro, I want to see some cons, some challenges of a staycations. What are the problems and the negative side of the coin? And without knowing these weak points, we can't make it more sustainable. So if you have some insight in this area, please.
I think the issue that the person asking the question for Fiona raised is a continuing one. Some places, the local populations just don't have the capacity to travel. And while I think that that's changing, hopefully in many parts of the world, but certainly if we had had a whole day, I was going to ask a colleague to join us from Africa, but the timing doesn't work. And she certainly has worked in countries where local populations, just people cannot afford to travel, and they don't really engage in tourism. So yeah, there are no easy answers for some of those, and that's the same for some of the more remote places in countries like Australia. Certainly, I don't know about Karen, but Laurie and I have worked with people offering really great products, but they are very, very remote, and so locals, and then that makes them very expensive. And for international tourists who've already travelled a long way and are interested in that luxury experience, they're prepared to pay for it. But as Karen pointed out, locals are not. I think that continues to be a problem, is getting staycationers to pay for the more expensive and products. I think that continues to be a con. I think we've also seen in countries like Australia abuse of natural environments, where people have all decided to go camping in places that had not previously had lots of people camping. And I know that's also happened in North America and some parts of Europe, where the pressure from local populations engaging in forms of staycation has really overwhelmed some of those places that just weren't prepared for it. So I think there are some cons, and we do need to recognize that. And I think the other major issue still, and it's one I'm sort of picking up in the chat there, I think from Elliot, is that staycations still tend to be shorter, which leaves they're possibly less seasonal, but they do tend to be focused around long weekends. So how do you get people to actually stay longer is another real challenge. And so they have some features as they're currently sort of conceptualized that are problematic. And I agree, because then we need to do some more research, I think, on what people are doing and what they're getting out of it to begin to understand those more. But that's me, and now I'll let anyone else talk.
Thank you very much, Gianna. Daniel has mentioned a couple of comments, and a good question was the difference of domestic tourism and staycations. I think it was mentioned by some of our speakers. And also, he suggested that the key point is product development. And product development plays a key role. And also he mentioned that in midweek, the destinations are very quiet. They are too lonely and quiet. How to tackle it? I think it makes sense because the destinations are not prepared for mass marketing of tourism. And maybe being quiet is an advantage. So again, it goes back to the right market. So we have to seek the target, those who are seeking for these destinations. And I do believe that product development is a good point. But any of our speaker, you want to add comments?
Yes,
I know a few. Sorry, go, Jenny.
Sorry, Laurie. If I may just add, I just wanted to go back to the comment that Karen made, and in relation to Elliot's question. It's really hard to define staycation because it really depends on the geographic makeup of the destination in question. So in the case of Singapore, it's hard to define staycation because it's an island state. And in the case of places like the Maldives and the Seychelles, the concept of staycation is very different compared to the European countries and even Australia and other parts of Asia. So it's a challenge to define staycation to begin with, because it's highly contextualized. It depends on the geographical context and the makeup of the population as well. How they see staycation in Singapore, based on a study that a group of postgraduate students and I did, was just limited to staying at hotels and resorts within the country. Because once you go out of Singapore, it's no longer domestic tourism. So it's really difficult to demarcate the line between staycation and domestic tourism in the case of Singapore, as an example. I also wanted to make a comment on making domestic tourists pay for a staycation. I think if we do combine the elements of slow travel and staycation, I think it can be more sustainable for a lot of businesses and destinations. There are certainly elements of these two forms of tourism that can be combined. And if we play our cards well as academics and also as policymakers and businesses, I think it's highly doable. I think that if we do start with, say, a network of small villages or tribes, say, for example, in PNG, I just found Fiona's presentation very insightful as well. So I think it's a very good case study. I think if we do, say, combine 2 or 3 neighboring villages in Papua New Guinea to create that network to work together and offer a variety of slow tourism / staycation elements or experiences, I think that can be a good start. That's it for me.
Laurie, I think you were going to say something before Jenny.
Yeah, just that notion of the shorter weekend trips characterizing staycation. I know there are some destinations, including Whitsundays near us, that are trying to attract remote workers. So now that people have shifted during COVID to be able to work from home and work from anywhere, and they have been doing so from their home for a year now, to say, hey, why don't you just bring your laptop, come and stay, for a month and work from here. And they're actually also trying to address the shortage of skilled staff in that region in terms of people working at the resorts. And so for them to ramp back up, they're having trouble attracting staff. So they're actually trying to get people to relocate to the region for the jobs that they have on offer. But if not, if you're a professional that can work from anywhere, then come spend some time staying here or living here for a short period of time. And so maybe, thinking about mobilities rather than just tourists is a important point.
Yeah, certainly.
Thanks, Laurie. Yes.
I was just going to say, I think in terms of definitions, we as academics can get too hung up on them. I think what we need to do is say it's really about, it's essentially about people staying closer to where they live. And for lots of places, that will mean they are domestic tourists, but not in all places, depending on your borders and where you are. They essentially, if we stick with it's whatever local means in your part of the world. So in the southern parts of Austria, local might mean Slovenia, Slovakia, and Italy, because you are literally closer to them than you are, say, to Vienna. In Australia, local might mean anyone within 4 hours driving distance. But I think we can get too hung up on that. And it was interesting when we went and talked about this to some of the people from tourism from Magnetic Island there. they instantly, yeah, locals, we know who you mean, and they've got that much clearer than we have. We could have spent forever. I tried to have a definition with kilometres, and they all just kind of looked at me and they went, "Oh, isn't she cute?" and said, essentially, we know what a local is. It's all right. And essentially, their perimeter for a local was within a sort of half-day drive, because that's what we do here. But I think someone else in the comments there has talked about how driving long distances may not always be a more sustainable alternative. And I think that's another thing that we less worrying about the definition and more worrying about what the reality might be. And I think we've certainly seen some of those issues around the larger cities in Australia, where people have taken their cars for things like school holiday breaks, and the traffic and the challenges of getting people in and out of some of those cities has created some really unpleasant scenarios. So that's another con, is driving always, which is what happens in many countries for staycations, is driving always such a good option? It may not be either. So that's a good point that was raised in the chat.
Thanks very much, Kiana. Before I pass the floor to Professor Jafari for the final comments and remarks, this exciting discussion is going on, and the time is going past. So I could understand that staycations is about, it doesn't matter how far distance we go, it's just how deep we can go into our destination. And sometimes we are living in a place, but we are not really close to our place. So I could experience this when I was doing some research on agricultural heritage landscapes in Japan. And I was asking people who were living in some kind of heritage landscape. And because of everyday lifestyle and living in the place, everything was too usual for them, or just ordinary. And they were not really aware about the values and even the history of the place that they are living in, and a few generations before themselves. So staycations is not about to bring new people, but is to reintroduce a type of forgotten heritage or destination, and we have to understand our own resources or local resources to value it and to market it. And I really appreciate all these informations that I'm learning a lot from you today. So if no more questions, I would like to ask Jafar for your ideas. Jafar, the floor is yours. You're muted, Jafar. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. It is very late, late in the night here. It's close to morning. So my eyes are closing, but you opened my mind. I mean, this was an eye-opening discussion. I thought I knew about staycation. I learned a lot. But the interesting thing is, at the end, there were so many questions we wanted to answer. The last one is the definition, for example. And based on your discussion, I don't think the definition should be based on geographical measurement, but it is state of mind. Now, I don't know how to capture that state of mind. If your state of your mind says you're on vacation, whether you are 10 feet away from your house or 10 kilometers. But that's something that somebody else with psychological understanding of tourism can do for us. So it was really an eye-opening discussion. I learned a lot. Honestly, I learned a lot. Thank you very much to every member of the panel. And I made a little observation. I hope I don't say it the wrong way. I meant to say it the right way. The panel was all women. And I bet if I could look at the audience, the majority are women too. So here's a question. Is this a subject that would be more of interest to female population? And I want to answer that as yes. Because women are more in the, they have their hearts are in hospitality, and they like to do it themselves, and they have a sense of beauty, and they have a sense of delivery. So I wish, Kazem, you could look, if it was possible to look at the gender of the audience, you would see the audience were also predominantly women. I made two decisions tonight. One of them is that we have to have a part 2 of this seminar, of this webinar, with the distinction that this time we talk more about research. I would like to have another follow-up panel on staycation, but applied. How do we transfer the knowledge we talked about today, to the communities that can benefit from it, to the operators that can benefit from it? You know, we always talk about this session, we talk about research questions, and we should look into this research, we should look into that. But now how can we transfer the knowledge we have and the transfer that the knowledge we are going to get to the communities that can really benefit from it? And Gianna, you also mentioned you are doing a book, you gave an idea. I also decided, I do a book series called Bridging Tourism Theory and Practice. I decided to do a book, an edited book, not myself, and you can step forward. Something like along this line, staycation benefits of staying closer to home. It would be a more applied type. How do we transfer the knowledge, etc. So seriously, if anybody's interested to edit a book on this subject, write to me, I send you the proposal, and it would be a wonderful thing. We would have, there's the possibility of doing one volume, which is more theoretical, and one volume, which is more applied. So thanks again for this wonderful discussion with lots of fruits in it. And of course, the architect of this webinar was Gianna. Thank you very much for putting this such a good panel together. And basically, Gianna, I'm going to write to you and see if I can motivate you to do the part 2 of this webinar with focus on the application of the knowledge we were talking about. So thank you very much, everybody. Kazem, if you have anything else yourself to add. And also do remember that we have other webinars. We do 2 webinars per month, one in English and one in local languages. But we have begun with the big languages. We have done already a webinar 100% in Chinese, 100% Portuguese, 100% Spanish. I forgot what else we did. Russian is coming up, and
Persian.
We did Persian. Anyhow, we did Arabic just recently, a few weeks ago. So we have done the major languages. We are going to possibly repeat those as well. And the idea is that what we are talking about should be useful to the community in tourism, but most communities in tourism do not speak English. So again, we fail if we don't use their own language. And we have, there was a question or the comments about domestic tourism. Our volume 2 of this webinar seminar is on domestic tourism. The panel is already up. Please visit it and please join us. Kazem, back to you.
Thank you so much, Jafar, and thank you, Gianna, and all panelists. It was a wonderful event, and evening or morning. Here is just in the early afternoon. I would like to invite you to visit our website, scotwebinars.org. You can find the list of the upcoming webinars, and the past webinars are recorded. You can log into our YouTube channel. Please subscribe it. Please like us. Please communicate with us, and please let us send you a questionnaire because we do value your opinions to make this dialogue better. And I really appreciate your contribution by replying to the questionnaires that SCoT team are going to send you. And we should not forget that we have a team of very good people supporting all these activities in admin and promotion. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful event.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Shukran. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.